If you drive and you are over the age of 65, there are 5 real changes moving through state DMV systems right now that could affect how often you renew, what you have to bring with you, and in at least one state, who can report your driving without your permission. Some of these changes make life harder. One of them, surprisingly, makes life easier. I am going to walk you through all 5, state by state, with the actual numbers, because the version of this story spreading online right now is not accurate, and I think you deserve the real one. I'm Helen Carter, and this is the Senior Rulebook. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn exactly which states are tightening renewal rules, which state just loosened one of the toughest requirements in the country, and what to check on your own license before your next renewal notice shows up in your mailbox. Stick around until the end, because one of these changes involves a new way family members can get involved in a loved one's driving status, and it's the part most people miss completely when they hear about this topic secondhand. If staying ahead of rules like this matters to you, hit subscribe now, because the Senior Rulebook tracks exactly this kind of change as it happens, state by state, without the noise. Before we get into the 5 changes, I want to clear up something important because it affects how you should think about everything else in this video. Over the past year, a story has circulated that the federal government, specifically the Department of Transportation, was rolling out a nationwide mandatory testing system for drivers over 70. 4-year renewals with vision tests for the youngest seniors, 2-year renewals for the middle group, and annual road tests with cognitive exams for the oldest drivers. It sounded official. It had numbers attached. It got shared by the thousands. It is not true. There is no federal driver's license law in this country for seniors or anyone else. The Department of Transportation does not issue licenses, does not set renewal ages, and cannot require a road test. Licensing has always been handled entirely by individual states, and that has not changed. Fact-checking organizations looked into this specific claim and confirmed it was fabricated. I am telling you this first because I don't want you spending energy worrying about a federal rule that does not exist, when there are real, state-level changes that actually deserve your attention. I want to give you one example of how this kind of confusion plays out in real life, and I'll say clearly up front that this is a fictional example, not a real case, just a situation built to show you how this usually unfolds. Picture a retired schoolteacher named Carol Whitfield, 76 years old, living outside Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her daughter sends her a video clip claiming that starting in August, drivers over 70 will need a 4-year renewal with a mandatory vision and reaction time test, and that drivers over 87 will need an annual road test. Carol spends a week worried about an exam she assumes is coming nationwide. When her actual renewal notice arrives from the Oklahoma Department of Public Safety a few months later, none of that language appears anywhere on it, because Oklahoma, like every other state, sets its own rules, and no federal testing tier like the one in the video has ever existed. The stress was real. The rule was not. That is exactly the gap I want to close for you today, because the actual state-by-state rules are specific enough, and in some cases serious enough, that you do not need an invented national mandate to make this topic worth 15 minutes of your attention. So let's talk about what is actually happening, starting with the state that just made things easier, not harder. Here is where this gets important. Illinois has been the only state in the entire country that required a mandatory behind-the-wheel road test based purely on a driver's age, regardless of how clean their driving record was. For years, that age was 79. If you turned 79 in Illinois, no matter how many decades you had driven without an incident, you went back to a testing center and took a road test like a 16-year-old just to keep the license you already had. That is changing. Governor Pritzker signed House Bill 1226, called the Road Safety and Fairness Act, in August of last year, and it takes effect July 1st of this year. The mandatory road test age is moving from 79 to 87. That is an 8-year shift. Roughly 350,000 Illinois drivers fall into the age range that benefits directly from this change. Secretary of State Alexei Giannoulias, who pushed for this alongside AARP Illinois, made the point plainly. A birthday is not an accurate measure of whether someone can safely drive. Crash data backs that up. Older drivers are not automatically riskier than younger drivers based on age alone. Now, this does not mean Illinois seniors get a completely free pass. If you are 79 or older in Illinois, you will still need to renew in person. You will still need a vision test. And depending on your driving history, you may still be asked to take a written test. What's gone is the automatic, no exceptions road test simply for hitting a certain birthday. There is also a new piece to this law that families need to know about. For the first time, immediate family members in Illinois can formally report a loved one to the Secretary of State's office if they believe cognitive decline, memory loss, or a medical condition is affecting that person's ability to drive safely. If the report is taken seriously, the driver in question may be asked to complete written, vision, or road testing to keep their license, regardless of age. This does not apply automatically, and it is not something a neighbor or a casual acquaintance can trigger. It applies to immediate family, and it is meant to catch situations where someone's driving has genuinely become unsafe, but no one has had the difficult conversation yet. This does not apply to everyone. But if you have an aging parent, spouse, or sibling in Illinois whose driving has worried you, this is a real, lawful path that exists now where it didn't before. Before this law, Illinois was one of only 5 states in the country that did not allow immediate family members to formally raise this kind of concern with the licensing authority. Friends, neighbors, or even adult children outside the immediate family still cannot file this kind of report under the new law. It is specifically limited to spouses, children, and parents, which lawmakers designed that way to prevent the system from being misused by someone with a grudge or a dispute unrelated to actual driving safety. If you're in Illinois and you've been putting off a hard conversation with a parent about their driving, this law gives you a formal channel, but it does not replace that conversation. The review process still takes time, and a license is not pulled the moment a report is filed. The Secretary of State's office reviews the concern first and decides whether testing is warranted. I will come back to family reporting again later, because at least one other state has a comparable structure, and the details differ enough that they matter. Let's move to California, because this is the state I get the most questions about, and the rules here are genuinely a mix of stricter and more lenient than people expect. For California drivers 70 or older, the renewal still involves an in-person DMV visit for vision and photo requirements. You may start parts online, but final renewal is not fully remote anymore. You also must pass a vision test at every single renewal, no exceptions, and that has not changed and is not changing. Here is the part that catches people off guard, and it goes in the lenient direction. Until October of 2024, every California driver 70 and older had to retake the written knowledge test at every renewal, regardless of how spotless their record was. That requirement is gone for most drivers now. If you have a clean record, meaning no serious recent crashes, violations, or suspensions, your renewal notice may let you skip the knowledge test. If your record does flag you for testing, California now offers a pass-only e-learning course you can complete on a phone, tablet, or computer, instead of sitting for the old-style written exam. This is where many seniors accidentally assume the rules only got harder over time. In California's case, one of the more frustrating requirements was actually removed. The vision test, though, remains in place at 70 and stays in place every 5 years after that. Your renewal notice will tell you exactly which steps apply to you, so read it closely instead of assuming. This is the part many people overlook. A doctor in California is required by law to report certain diagnoses, including dementia and Alzheimer's, directly to the DMV. This is not optional on the physician's part, and it is not something the patient or family controls. If that report happens, the DMV can require additional testing, issue a restricted license, place you on medical probation with regular check-ins, or in more serious cases, suspend the license altogether. Here's how that can actually unfold. And again, this is a fictional example built only to illustrate the process, not a real case. Imagine a retired postal worker named Raymond Delgado, 73, living in Fresno. Raymond has driven his entire adult life without a single accident. After a routine checkup, his doctor notes early signs of memory decline and is legally required to forward that information to the California DMV. Raymond doesn't find out about the referral until a letter arrives asking him to schedule a re-examination, sometimes well before his actual renewal date would have come up. For someone like Raymond, this can feel sudden and unfair, especially if he feels perfectly capable behind the wheel. But the process isn't designed to strip a license on the spot. The DMV re-examination can result in a few different outcomes: a license with restrictions, such as daytime-only driving, a probationary period with periodic medical updates from his doctor, or, if the office determines driving has become genuinely unsafe, suspension. The point of walking through Raymond's situation is this: if you or someone you love receives a letter like this in California, it is not automatically the end of their independence, but it is also not something to ignore or assume will resolve on its own. Responding promptly and bringing updated medical documentation from your own doctor generally gives you the best chance at a fair outcome. If you or someone in your family has a recent diagnosis like this, do not assume nothing will happen until the next renewal date. The DMV review can begin independently of your renewal cycle once a report is filed. Now to Texas, where the structure works differently than either Illinois or California, because Texas mainly uses age 79 and 85 as its key renewal trigger points. Texas issues standard licenses on an 8-year renewal cycle for most adult drivers, including those aged 79 through 84. Once a driver turns 85, that renewal cycle shortens to 2 years. The state's reasoning is straightforward: more frequent check-ins as drivers move into the oldest age bracket, where vision and reaction time changes, are more likely to show up. If you are approaching 85 in Texas, the practical thing to do is mark your calendar now, because going from an 8-year rhythm to a 2-year rhythm is a big enough change in routine that people miss it. Texas does not currently require an automatic road test based on age alone, the way Illinois historically did. But the shortened renewal window means more frequent renewal contact. And if anything on your driving record raises a flag during one of those renewals, additional review can follow. Let's go to Florida next, because Florida's rule is one of the more specific and more frequently confused ones I see in the comments. Florida requires a vision test starting at age 80, not 70, and not 65. That is one of the latest age thresholds for vision testing of any state in the country. If you are 75 in Florida, the 80-year-old's vision rule does not yet apply to you. And I say that because I have seen seniors in Florida show up to renewal appointments stressed about a test that legally does not apply to them yet at their age. Below 80, Florida's older driver vision rule usually has not kicked in for drivers. Once you hit 80, the vision test becomes a mandatory part of every renewal going forward. Florida's renewal cycle for seniors also generally shortens compared to younger drivers. So pair that vision requirement with a tighter renewal calendar, and you have 2 things to track instead of 1. Now, before I get to the 5th point, I want to address the bigger pattern sitting underneath all 4 of these states, because this is genuinely where the confusion online started. People see one state's rule, assume it applies everywhere, and then panic when their own state's DMV notice doesn't match what they read on social media. Arizona begins shorter renewal cycles and in-person requirements at 65, one of the earliest thresholds in the country. Alaska, Iowa, and Louisiana activate vision and in-person rules around 69 to 70, similar to California. Indiana, Massachusetts, New Mexico, and Virginia start their additional requirements at 75. Georgia generally does not have a separate senior-specific renewal age rule, which surprises many people who assume every state changes license requirements once someone reaches 65. New York, by contrast, does not have a blanket senior-specific age rule at all. Your license there is affected by medical or vision concerns if they come up, not by a birthday alone. This is exactly why a single viral claim about the new senior driving rule can never accurately describe what's happening in the United States. There isn't one rule. There are 50 different systems, each with its own age thresholds, its own renewal cycles, and its own testing triggers. And some of them have been revised recently, in both stricter and more lenient directions depending on the state. Oregon and Washington, for example, lean on medical and driving record triggers rather than blanket age rules, which is part of why Illinois' reform specifically pointed to those two states as a model worth following. This is why the single most useful thing you can do after watching this video is look up your own state by name, not rely on a number that applies somewhere else. Here is where many seniors accidentally leave themselves exposed, and this is change number 5. Across many states with senior-specific driving rules, the renewal window itself can shrink as you age, even without a dramatic headline change like Illinois or California. A license that renewed every 8 years in your 50s might renew every 4 years in your 70s, and every 2 years past 80, depending on where you live. The danger here isn't the rule itself, it's that the rhythm changes quietly, and a notice that used to arrive once nearly a decade now arrives twice as often, sometimes more. If you're used to setting a reminder once and forgetting about it for years, that habit can fail you right when the testing or documentation requirements are at their strictest. Let me walk through one more fictional situation, because this is the kind of mistake I hear about most often from viewers, and it has nothing to do with failing a test. Imagine a retired truck driver named Walter Higgins, 81 years old, in a state where his renewal cycle shortened from 8 years to 2 once he crossed 80. Walter had driven professionally for almost 40 years and had never once worried about a DMV deadline because for most of his life, renewal came around so rarely that he barely thought about it. After he turned 80, the cycle quietly shortened. But Walter kept the old habit of assuming he had years before he needed to think about it again. His license expired without him realizing the window had changed, and he found himself unable to drive himself to a medical appointment until he could get back into the DMV system, weeks later than he expected. Nothing about Walter's driving ability was ever in question. The problem was entirely about timing and a renewal cycle that moved faster than his habits had adjusted to. This is exactly the kind of situation that has nothing to do with brutal new tests or federal mandates, and everything to do with a simple calendar mismatch that catches good drivers off guard. This is not about fear. It is about knowing the rule before the rule affects you. So here is what I want you to actually do this week, not someday. Go to your own state's official DMV or Secretary of State website. Do not rely on a video, a flyer, or a forwarded text message, including this one, for your specific numbers. Search your state's name plus driver license renewal seniors and look for a .gov website specifically, since that's the easiest way to avoid landing on a third-party site that may already be out of date by the time you read it. Find your renewal cycle and the exact age where additional requirements kick in for your state. If you have a renewal coming in the next 12 months, check whether your state requires in-person attendance, a vision test, a written test, or a medical disclosure form, because finding this out a week before your appointment is much harder than finding it out today. If you live in Illinois and you are between 79 and 86, mark July 1st on your calendar, because that is when the road test requirement lifts for your age range, and you will still need your in-person renewal and vision test on schedule. Don't assume the road test requirement disappears for you automatically before that date arrives. If you live in California and are 70 or older, confirm whether your driving record is clean, because that determines whether you'll face a written test or qualify to skip it. And remember, the vision test applies regardless either way. If you live in Texas and you're approaching 85, prepare for your renewal cycle to cut from 8 years down to 2, and set more than one reminder, since that's the kind of shift that's easy to miss the first time it happens. If you live in Florida and you're approaching 80, expect the vision test to become a fixed part of every future renewal, and don't confuse that threshold with the lower ages that apply in other states. And if you have a parent, spouse, or sibling whose driving safety has worried your family, look into whether your state allows a formal family-initiated review, because Illinois now does. And it's worth checking whether your own state has a similar provision, since some states handle these reviews differently in practice. One last thing before you go check your own state's rules. The biggest mistake I see isn't failing a vision test or a road test. It's not knowing the rules changed at all until a renewal notice arrives and something on it doesn't match what was true 5 or 10 years ago when you last paid close attention. Treat your license renewal the same way you'd treat a Medicare notice or a Social Security letter. Read it fully, the year it arrives, not the year you assume it still says what it used to. Before you make any decision about a license, a renewal, or a family member's driving status, verify the details with your state DMV directly, or speak with a licensing specialist there. Every one of these rules depends on your age, your driving record, your state of residence, and in some cases your medical history. So what applies to your neighbor in another state may not apply to you at all. If this helped you understand what is actually changing and what is just noise, share it with someone in your life who drives, or with an adult child who's been wondering whether it's time to have a conversation with a parent about driving. That conversation is hard enough without bad information making it harder. And if you want the real rules explained before the rumors do, instead of after, subscribe to the Senior Rulebook, because we'll keep tracking these changes state by state as they happen. I'm Helen Carter. Stay informed, stay safe on the road, and I'll see you in the next one.